everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. This is my very first video as part of my educational series for all my buyers out there, as well as first-time home sellers. This series is meant to take you through the entire escrow process, as well as to teach you about the purchase contract here in Hawaii. First off, I just want to introduce myself. My name is David Lee. I am a realtor currently with eXp Realty. I've been doing real estate for just under 10 years now, so I do have quite a bit of experience. I hope that you folks will get a lot of value out of this, and you folks will be able to be educated on the process, on one of the biggest purchases and life decisions that you folks will make in your lives. A couple things I do want to go over before we start. This is purely my interpretation of the purchase contract. Again, I've been doing this for just under 10 years now, so I do know a thing or two about it. If you require further explanation, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me or comment below. I'm more than happy to answer them or share my opinions. For any realtors who are watching this, thanks for tuning in. I hope you get a lot of value out of this as well. Yeah, without further ado, we can begin. So what you see before you on your screen is a typical escrow timeline. This is something that I personally like to do for my clients. I put things together into a nice calendar format. That way it's a little bit easier for everybody to know what's expected of them from a day-to-day standpoint. Some agents will hand out an Excel spreadsheet. I don't really care to look at those because it gets super confusing. I prefer these calendars. It's much easier to kind of interpret. Everything that I'm going to show you is going to be included in a download box, some sort of Dropbox or a Google Drive or something. It'll be in the description box below. Basically, what you see before you here in this calendar format, it's your typical 45-day escrow timeline, meaning that once you have your contract accepted, take about 45 days for everything to go through. And then at the end of those 45 days, you will be the new owner of this home in Hawaii. Now, everything in here, all these contingencies that you see is pulled directly from the purchase contract. This is the purchase contract here. It's 14 pages long. I don't expect you guys to read through this entire thing. Everything you see here is pulled straight from the contract, and these are going to be the dates that are most important to you, okay? So you'll see here, I have two different color patterns. Everything that's in red right now is things that is expected of the buyer, the buyer's agent, or the lender. Everything that is in black is going to be the seller's responsibility. So you'll notice here in your typical purchase, the buyers definitely have a lot more responsibilities than the sellers do. And that's just because the purchase contract is very buyer friendly. It offers a lot of protections for buyers out there, just so that they can make an educated decision on whether or not they want to buy the property. So I'm going to break up this video into two parts, just so it's a little bit easier to digest. Keep in mind, a lot of things in real estate, especially the timelines, do end up changing depending on when certain documents are exchanged between both buyer and seller. If these do change, what I do for my clients is I'll give them an updated timeline with the updated dates. Every single contingency in an escrow, every due date that we have, it's based off X amount of days after the acceptance date, which in this case, it would be October 8th. That just means that both buyer and seller have agreed to the purchase contract and they're ready to move forward with the purchase process. The other dates that are measured will be based off X amount of days prior to a closing date. So typically, closing for a property in Hawaii takes about 45 days in general. So if we had our acceptance date of October 8th, 45 days from then would be November 22nd. To start off, on October 11th, and this will be 2 to 3 business days or so after the acceptance date, the buyer is required to show a proof of funds. Now, this is typically going to come from the lender in the form of a letter. It basically says that they have reviewed the buyer's finances and have determined that they have enough money to do the down payment and closing costs for the transaction. It's a super simple letter. Some sellers may ask for bank statements as well. It's really up to the listing agent and how they want to handle things. Also on the 11th, and this is going to be typically 3 days after the acceptance date as well, the buyer is responsible to select their termite inspector. Once the termite inspector has been selected, the seller will then contact them at a later date to perform the inspection. On October 12th, and this is typically 3 business days after the acceptance date, the buyer is expected to make their first initial deposit, and this will be pertaining to paragraph B1 on the purchase contract. This is just a random number. You're going to have a discussion with your realtor to determine how much initial down payment you're going to put in. Do keep in mind that the higher your initial down payment, that'll typically represent how serious you are as a buyer. Again, have a discussion with your realtor, determine how much you are comfortable in putting in. Another thing to keep in mind too is your initial down payment here. It's completely safe, especially because you have the J1 contingency to protect you as a buyer. If there is any reason you do not like the property and you do end up terminating or canceling the purchase contract within these first 1.5 to 2 weeks, your deposits will be safe. Again, this is marked in red, so make sure as a buyer that you make your deposits on or before this date. Do not be late. Also on this date, the sellers are required to approve of their proof of funds that came from the buyer. On the 13th, the seller is expected to provide to us a copy of the furnishings list per paragraph E4 of the purchase contract. The furnishing list is going to include items such as like furniture that they're leaving behind, maybe like a TV set, dressers, bed frames, things like that. Those would be included in your typical furnishings list. Once that furnishings list is provided, the buyers will now have an opportunity to review that list and determine if they want to cancel the transaction. They also have the ability to pick and choose which items they want to keep from that furnishings list. So once we receive it on the 13th, we have until the 16th here to approve of that furnishings list. Also on the 13th, the seller's real property disclosure statement, or SRPDS for short, is going to be provided to us from the seller. Now I'm going to pull up a copy of the seller's real property disclosure statement just so you can see what it looks like. It's super simple. It's a 5-page report from the seller, and it's just going to list everything that they know about the property that could measurably affect the value to a reasonable buyer. A couple of things here: if the property is exposed to types of recurring excessive noise, Big Island has a lot of cookie frogs, so you'll definitely see a disclosure here about it. If a home is located next to a freeway, usually there'll be some sort of disclosure about that as well. Really anything that can measurably affect the value of the property will be disclosed on this form. Those will also include things like renovations or things that need to be repaired. And this will be coming from the seller to the best of the seller's knowledge. Okay, so once you receive that seller's disclosure statement, our buyers are expected to provide a buyer's receipt of the SRPDS. That receipt will be due on the 16th, 2 or 3 days after we get that document. It's just a very simple acknowledgement that they got the paperwork, not that they approved of the document itself. The approval of the SRPDS is not due until the 18th, and that's typically 5 days after we get that document. Okay, and again, if the buyers don't like what they see, this is their opportunity to cancel out of the purchase contract based on the seller's real property disclosure statement. And the reason why we want this document due early on is just so that we can also provide that document to the home inspectors. What the home inspector will then do after they get that document is they'll read through it, say there's a leaky roof or something that has been repaired over time. They'll go ahead, check out that area to make sure that the roof was repaired or that there is no longer a current leak going on. So it's a very important document for us to get up front. That way we can arm the buyers with as much information. That way they can make an educated decision. Now on the 15th, per paragraph F7, the buyers will have to notify escrow with any changes in conveyance. And the reason why this is significant is when you are selling a property in Hawaii, the sellers pay what's called a conveyance tax. The conveyance tax changes depending on the type of buyer. If a buyer is purchasing the property as an owner-occupant or principal residence, meaning they're buying it and they'll live in it, that conveyance tax is lower. When the buyer is buying the property as an investment property, basically they're going to buy it and rent it out to somebody else, that conveyance tax is slightly higher. The buyers have to notify escrow by this date of any changes in how they will take ownership of the property. And we've already gone over what will happen on the 16th. The buyer is expected to approve of the furnishings list that they received on the 13th. And this will be the last day they have to provide receipt of the SRPDS. Now on October 17th, per paragraph G1, escrow is going to provide what's known as the preliminary title report. Now that report is super significant because it will show if the property has any liens against the property, liens that may prevent the home from being sold to the new owner. Very common things that we'll see could be mechanics liens. Mechanics liens happen when a home has been renovated and the seller neglected to pay off the contractor. The contractor can then file what's called a mechanics lien against the property. That mechanics lien will prevent the home from being sold or conveyed to the new owner until the contractor has been paid for their work. So that preliminary title report will pull that information and it'll be provided to the buyers, typically a week to a week and a half after we have a accepted contract. This is also another opportunity for the buyers to review that information and to determine if they really want to go ahead and purchase the property. Once we receive this, we will typically have about 5 days or so to review the document and to approve of that preliminary title report. So we'll have until the 22nd to review and approve of that preliminary title report from Escrow. Lastly, on the 18th, and this will be bolded as well, this is the biggest contingency that the buyers have to protect them. This is what's called the J1 General Inspection of Property Contingency. So this is your opportunity for the buyers to go into the home, have a home inspector check everything out to make sure that this is going to be the home that they really want. As a realtor, I always suggest to my buyers that they, check out the home during different days of the week, different times of the week as well, especially if you have some sort of buyer who is in dire need of like a lot of street parking. Street parking looks very, very different throughout different times of the day and different days of the week as well. You also want to go back during different times just to see the demographic of the neighborhood, how hot it gets during certain times of the day. This will be the time to do it. If we do find anything that is wrong with the home, this is also the opportunity for your realtor to go ahead and make negotiations on your behalf, whether that's in the form of a credit towards your closing costs for the buyer, or some sort of repair of those areas that have been damaged in the home. And then as realtors, we always recommend that we do this home inspection early on as possible, just because the sellers are never obligated to make any sort of repair. Whether you're buying the property as is or not, they're never obligated to make any repairs to the home. So we want to do this upfront and as early on as possible. That way it gives us as realtors enough time to do those negotiations necessary on the buyer's behalf. And again, if you don't like what you see from that home inspection, or if the negotiations just fall apart, this is your opportunity to cancel out the purchase contract. And then if you use this contingency to cancel, your initial deposit that you put in on the 12th is completely safe. Also on the 18th, paragraph G3, vesting and tenancy, you'll either take property as tenants in severalty, tenancy in common, joint tenancy, or tenants by the entirety. Now you can work with your agent to determine how best to take title. Just keep in mind, as realtors, we are not allowed to advise you on how to take title. We can explain each one, but we can't tell you at the end of the day how you should be taking title. And then lastly, on the 18th, if you haven't approved of it already, this is when the seller's real property disclosure statement is to be approved. And then once you have approved of your J1 General Inspection of Property Contingency, your next deposit, and in this case, it's $10,000, will be due on the 20th, 2 business days after the approval of the J1 contingency. So we'll end the video here. The next video will be covering everything that will happen from the 20th and on.